I know we have the best pen testing services around these parts. If we can just get in front of the right people, Big Daddy's pen testing will be nationwide faster than green grass through a goose. Instant ROI, a Las Vegas event that attracts hundreds of cybersecurity thought leaders and practitioners, as well as over 25,000 listeners worldwide. This is exactly what we need.
Oh, it's Big Daddy. Oh, it's Big Daddy. It's Big Daddy. Oh, it's Big Daddy.
Pearl, can you hear me? I found the answer to our problem. Have you heard of BarCode security?
BarCode security? Of course! I listen to their podcast all the time. I listen during Pilates, while I'm baking, while I'm driving, when I'm playing badminton with the girls. That Chris is sure easy on the eyes. We all love his cocktail recipes. Did I tell you that Betty Lou said...
Pearl, I need you to focus. Says here that BarCode is hosting their live event, BarCode 3 in Las Vegas, after Black Hat concludes for the day. And they're currently accepting sponsors, Pearl.
But we already have tons of parties to attend that week in Vegas.
I don't care what the plans we have. Cancel them. I want Big Daddy's pen testing front and center, getting exposure to BarCode's audience of cybersecurity leadership, decision makers, and hands-on security professionals. It is of the utmost importance, Pearl. Attendees will experience live interviews with special guests, cybersecurity trailblazers, groundbreaking researchers, industry gurus, and more. And Big Daddy pen testing needs to be on that stage.
I'm getting hot and heavy just thinking about it. I will call BarCode as soon as my muffins come out of the oven.
Pearl, we don't have time for muffins. Sponsorships are limited. We need this done faster than a babysitter's boyfriend when that car pulls up.
Syntax. Engaging. This is BarCode, a cocktail-powered podcast that dives deep into the personalities, criminals, and heroes that have come to define security across the globe. Please join our host, Chris Glandon, for another wild foray into the incredible world of humans and how they intertwine with today's modern technology. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Three, two, one.
Activate.
Welcome to BarCode. I'm your host, Chris Glandon, and today I'm with Dr. Fred Heiding, who is a cybersecurity researcher at Harvard's Belfer Center, where he focuses on defending against AI-powered cyber attacks, particularly in the realms of social engineering and phishing. His work bridges the technical, business, and policy dimensions of security, aiming to design systems resilient to threats posed by super intelligent AI. Fred also serves on the World Economic Forum Cybercrime Center and teaches at Harvard Kennedy School with research featured at Black Hat, DEF CON, IEEE Access, and Harvard Business Review. Fred, thanks for joining me, man. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, man. It's great. It's great to be here. Always like our chats.
Absolutely, man. So I mentioned Black Hat, which is actually where you and I met almost 2 years ago, which seems insane. And we chatted for the Inhuman Project on weaponized AI. And again, every time I talk to you, I gotta thank you for your time on that involvement in that project. For those that don't know you or aren't familiar with your work, if you don't mind, just please introduce yourself and, talk us through your path and how you ended up where you are professionally today.
Yeah, and again, thanks for having me today. Thanks for having me to all the previous events. It's great to be here. And yeah, right now doing postdoctoral research at the Harvard Kennedy School here in Boston in the US. I focus on the intersection of technology and policy. My PhD was in computer science, focused on quite technical cyber aspects. I've done a lot of work on cyber attacks toward cyber physical system, a lot of evaluation of IoT systems. A lot of my early work was to raise awareness that these smart devices that many people have in their homes, smart cameras and smart door locks, they're very easy to hack. We hacked a bunch of them just to show people that the security is quite low here. And we really try to push for, this shouldn't be the case. And I'm pretty happy going to the policy side now, because now I do still some technical work, but I do more work on trying to make sure that the vulnerabilities that I discovered earlier in my research is pushed out to society. And for example, in the US, we see a big movement of shifting responsibility from the end users to the producers. And I think that's beautiful. Things like the Secure by Design Act. When we say that, the same way I like the metaphor to the food industry. If I go to a supermarket and buy a banana or some bread or whatever I buy, I know that it's not going to be too poisonous. It's not going to kill me. Maybe there's some things with too much sugar in it, but it's not going to be anything really bad in the food I buy. And with cybersecurity, we really need to reach the same level of security. If I purchase a baby monitor for my child, I have to know that the company don't have any vulnerabilities in that baby monitor. And that's not the case today. We're not there yet in cybersecurity. A lot of devices, even devices branded as secure, they have terrible security status. It could take an undergraduate student who don't know much about cybersecurity minutes to hack a device. And that's terrible. Obviously, attackers is going to do this, and obviously, attackers is exploiting this. So anyway, that's a lot of what got me into this. And for the past years, I've done a lot of work with AI, evaluating where AI empowers cybersecurity, looking at the symmetry and asymmetry between how AI benefits attackers and defenders. That led me to a lot of scams and social engineering attacks that AI is really good at conducting. The first time I met you, I talked about phishing, and that still my work. A lot of my work is still in that area today, looking into how would super intelligent AI look like in terms of deception, and how could we defend ourselves against super intelligent systems that are really good at just deceiving and making us do whatever they want us to do. And it's quite tricky.
Yeah, definitely, and it's continuing to evolve, and so I think that research that you're doing is super important to be able to continue that, and then also do your public speaking and put out research publicly on your findings, which you did send me some documentation, some research documentation, public documentation. I'll mention in regarding to your latest research on national security strategy. So before we get more into that topic, would you mind just speaking to the focus of that particular research and your driver behind that?
Yeah, so that's a really cool project. It's been going on for a few years now, and it's really an interesting path how it started. I went to a local conference here at Harvard, about South Korean security, not only cybersecurity but all security. And I asked a couple of questions about their cybersecurity. One of the arrangers of that conference, one of my co-authors called Alex O'Neill, reached out to me after and said, "Hey, these questions were quite interesting. Do you want to meet and just chat more?" We started talking, and we had a lot of different ideas for how to make a project. Started looking into some specific security studies against North Korea or Russia, but then we ended up on national cybersecurity strategies. Down the road, we met Lachlan. There was another co-author in the project who was part of creating Australia's national cybersecurity strategy. By that point, we really were sort of taken up by the idea that it's kind of interesting how these national cybersecurity strategies are created. And we really were intrigued by questions like, is there a best practice here? Like, what does it mean for a strategy to be good? They're quite different. I mean, Singapore's strategy and US and UK's and Sweden's, they're all rather different. And is that good? Is it supposed to be like that? And should these documents be technical? Should there be policy-oriented? How detailed should they be? And it's a lot of difference. Some documents are 20 pages with a lot of images. Some documents are 120 pages with no images. And is there a good way? Is there a bad way? We really want to sort of evaluate what have people done that works, what have people done that doesn't work, to help future people, especially countries with smaller economies, emerging economy countries, maybe third world countries that doesn't have as big of a budget to have internal cybersecurity agencies. We would like to help them and create this as sort of a blueprint for how they can proceed and secure their countries as well. So yeah, that's what led us to it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I did read through it, you mentioned blueprint. That's one thing that I think that it indicated clearly was the fact that there is no universal blueprint when it comes to global threat mitigation or detection. So I know a lot of people that are listening to this may have expected that, they may have not expected that. But regardless, at this time, I mean, your research has found that every nation really is just running solo, right? Based on their own respective political, economic, social, technical variables within their own, threat environment. So I guess, through your research, what have you found to be some of the risks that these nations face when they rely too heavily on their, I guess you would say, internal elements or context-specific approaches without really learning or understanding or seeing the broader global patterns that are occurring, around them?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question. There's a lot of things to pluck out here. First of all, national cybersecurity is, in every sense of the word, sort of just a way to represent the current political landscape. And when I started this research, I was pretty passionate about arguing for cybersecurity as a non-partisan element, and it should not be a subject that changes based on the current politics of the country. That's really not the case, and it's rather obvious when you think about it, because cybersecurity is just one of all the elements that runs a country. And these changes based on the current politics, and we see when we analyze countries around the world, governments that are a bit more labor focused that tend to have better cybersecurity protection for the people, for small enterprises and so forth. And we see in South Korea, they recently released a new strategy that's very hawkish against North Korea, whereas their previous strategy didn't barely mention North Korea and so forth. And this exactly reflects the current administration in South Korea that's very aggressive against North Korea, whereas the previous administration were far less aggressive against North Korea. So the first thing to say is that these things changes internally with the politics of the country, and that also affects, some countries are more isolationist, like Japan has a strong isolationist history. Their strategy is very focused on themselves and less focused on partnerships. But regarding the problems of failing to learn from other best practices, I think cybersecurity is quite similar to almost everywhere in the world. Like we had to learn about the failures of others, and we do have really, really good threat sharing networks in the world. I'm part of the World Economics Forum Cybercrime Center. It's a really good place to get smart people together from industry all over the world and collaborate. But these things changes. We do see a current trend that many regions and countries become more isolationist. There's some geopolitical trends in the world right now. It moves to this, so we will see where that how that plays out. You can't really conduct cybersecurity in isolation these days because everything is so interconnected. There's a massive amount of supply chain vulnerabilities and third-party dependencies that makes it quite tricky to not collaborate. You really need to collaborate. So there's different ways to answer that question, right? But I think, first of all, we will see a lot of cyber collaboration still, whatever happens, because it's just so... also, every big company have offices all over the world today. So we will see a lot of collaborations. I think the world is moving slightly towards a more isolationist trend, or at least smaller blocks, right? We see some people question NATO, for example, and then we have these sub-NATO blocks in, not cyber, but in general military, for example, the Nordics, where I'm born. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland is starting a lot of military collaborations. I think I read some studies about how these will probably extend to cyber collaborations, and maybe we'll see this sub-region. We have other existing large collaborations like the Five Eyes between US, Australia, and so forth. So yeah, that's a big spiel on that. But the dangers of not learning, just to summarize on that, I mean, cyber attacks, sometimes things happen that are quite impactful, and we just need to learn this. And unfortunately, there's a lot of cases where, if you look at a smaller level, we don't learn. For example, we have these massive CVE databases. We technically publish all vulnerabilities that are out there, or many of them, except for the 0 days. And that should mean that everyone just patch the systems and move on. That doesn't happen for a lot of reasons. And, I think that sort of that story is true for system levels. It's also true for nations. Like there's a lot of things we know that, hey, this doesn't work, and we know how to fix it, but we just don't fix it. It's very similar to the IoT devices I mentioned earlier. There's so many of these that have hard-coded passwords of 1, 2, 3, 4. It's terrible. Everyone knows we shouldn't have that, but we still have that. And passwords shouldn't even be a thing anymore because there's so many better ways to better authenticate systems, but they are. So we just have to learn these things. There's a lot of dangers from not learning.
Yeah. When you say collaboration, what specifically does that include? Because I definitely see the strength when you're collaborating, across nations on cybersecurity strategy. I'm just curious, what type of information is collaborated, and is there a risk itself within that process?
So this is super interesting. And basically, one thing we found out in the paper and in this research is that there are so many different ways of doing partnerships. And you can see this when you look at the scorecard, that almost every country has some leading aspects and some lagging aspects and some middle aspects, and I think that's as it's supposed to be, because you can't dominate all partnerships. You're going to have to choose. I don't necessarily know if there's a right or wrong here, but you can feel some sort of general trend as if you're a very small country, maybe it's beneficial to you to have some partnership with larger countries. If you're a large country, it's probably going to be quite tricky to get all of your internal domestic partnerships working, right? So you want to do that. If you're a federal state like the US or Germany, then you're probably going to need to spend quite some time to make sure that all the states or all the regions are working together, have cyber frameworks that collaborate. Because Germany has a lot of problems with that, so they probably need to spend a little bit more time on that to ensure that the different states can work together, that the federal cyber legislations and cyber strategies can actually be implemented and enacted so that different states have to follow them. Can be a lot of messiness otherwise if you have one overlapping federal cyber strategy and then all the states does their own things anyway. To some degree, we've seen that in the US with data protection too. Every state have their own sort of data protection law. California sort of set the standard, and a lot of other states follow now. But it's still pretty tricky in the US to know, based on, maybe you have your servers in one state and your users in another, and you operate in a lot of other states too, and that's a bit conflicted. So it really depends. I think, I couldn't just pick one type of partnerships that the most important. I really think that it depends so much on your, geopolitical context and the region you're in. One thing we do see throughout is that public-private partnerships are so important. I mean, we have a dedicated category for this, right? Because a government can't just do cyber by themselves. They really need to, first of all, foster a strong general technical scene, right? You want good tech companies, not even cyber related, just good technical companies, good developers, a good and healthy tech ecosystem. That usually translates fairly well into cyber, because when you have a talented technical work pool, you can just upskill these people to cyber relatively easy. So I think that's something you absolutely can't neglect. If you don't have a strong private sector technical and cyber workforce, it's going to be tricky. So that's one thing you really need to do. But then, you need to have some amount of international partnerships too, because otherwise it's going to be tough.
Yeah. When you look at the private sector and you see national strategy partnerships that are developing frameworks, and I'm curious to get your take on this because you're also on the academic side of, the research side as well. So, how do you see those two compare? Are the frameworks that these nations are building out are obviously, I can't imagine them being up to speed with where the research is and some of the newer generation type of threats that are emerging, like weaponized AI, for example, and where you do a lot of your research. I guess where do you see those two compare? Do you still feel like academia is ahead of developing frameworks, and how do we sort of implement that within the national security level?
Yeah, so that's a really good question as well, and to give a little story to that, when I started this research, especially coming from my PhD in computer science, being very technical, I think a lot of technical people have some amount of skepticism to policymakers. We think that the policymakers don't really know what they're doing, they don't understand cyber, and they don't understand technology. And I think there's probably some instances in the world where that is true, but in the context of cybersecurity, all the agencies, almost without exception, all the agencies that we talked to, and I had the pleasure of meeting all of them, they are the people working there are incredibly smart. They really know cyber. They're quite technical, and I'm very, very impressed by the amount of work that's being done in the cyber agencies. A lot of the agencies, cybersecurity agencies around the world, at different governments, they're working very quickly. They know that we have to run to stand still in this sector. We can't be sort of boggled up by the bureaucracy that maybe other parts of the government are facing. Of course, there are a lot of problems with government cyber tasks as well, but there are a lot of really smart people working on it. I'm surprised to see just how many people have a deep understanding of the technology that works in cybersecurity agencies. That was a very, very positive surprise for me. Of course, there's still challenges. I think one big challenge, as we also mentioned in our report, is how to make sure that these cybersecurity strategies are actually enacted upon or implemented. And they are sometimes quite hand-wavy. The US is an exception, it has a very good implementation plan. And other countries do have implementation plans as well. But I think there's a risk that you create this strategy document and then nothing really happens, it's just a document. That need not be terrible. You could have it for signaling purposes or so forth. But I think that the people working in the cybersecurity agencies, a lot of them are actually quite knowledgeable about cyber. They have a technical understanding of what happens. They do, invite people. I was invited to DC a few weeks ago to sort of talk about my research, say what are the latest threats and so forth. So they do try to stay abreast by talking to experts, being quick and nimble, which I think is positive. I would say that the knowledge in the government is not the problem. The problem is to implement that knowledge, that's always going to be tricky, right? How do you ensure that we do this quickly? How do we ensure that the business follows? Because there's no necessarily best answers here. There may be some best practices, but it's real difficult. Like, how do we harmonize regulations versus recommendations, for example? I think is really tricky. We see sometimes that maybe the cyber agencies know that we should do something, but if you regulate too much, then you can have over-regulations. And a lot of people these days criticize the European Union for over-regulating AI, which stifles innovation. Other people criticize the US for not regulating enough, right? So everyone will be a little bit disappointed at all the time. And it's the same in cyber, that I think we have a lot, the know-how we have, but then how do we sort of harmonize that? And how do we ensure that everyone does what we want to do? Because we don't want to hurt the industry too much. We do need to push sometimes. So yeah, I would say that the big problem is the implementation of the framework rather than creating the frameworks.
Yeah, definitely. So you had also mentioned in your research, you had mentioned the lack of focus on non-technical cyber talent, which I agree with, specifically legal and policy experts. What are some real world actions you think that governments could take to sort of correct this imbalance? And if this doesn't equalize at some point, what do you foresee as some of the consequences that we're up against it?
So I think that's a good question. To start with, I mean, encouraging, I'm quite biased because I come from a computer science background, but I really do believe, and I think I see some trends of this in the younger generation, but encouraging cybersecurity and especially computer science education. Because again, if you have a strong computer science knowledge, you can relatively, it's not easy to upskill to cyber, but if you're a policymaker with a strong computer science background, then you will have much easier to understand deep cybersecurity tech than if you don't have that, right? It's a massive difference. And I think that's a really, really big thing, just to ensure that we have more people educated in computer science, even people who don't end up being developers or working with technical domains. I think that's super important. To some degree, in industry, I feel that the market has sort of corrected that a little bit, because I see so many young students who takes computer science courses, they educate themselves in computer science educations, but they don't really strive to become a developer. They just want the computer science knowledge because they know that it's needed almost whatever you do. And I think that perhaps it's lagging a little bit at many policy schools. The Harvard Kennedy School, we all know that at the Kennedy School that there's way too few technical people here. I'm quite unique. And there are definitely some people around with the technical knowledge, but I think in the policy world, for whatever reasons, there are way fewer technical people around, and we just need to ensure that people who study computer science go to the policy world. I mean, I think there are some reasons. Many of my sort of peers and colleagues from my computer science days would not be interested in going anywhere close to policy areas, and I think that sort of bridge is difficult to cross, and we need to build new bridges, right, to ensure that people who are technically interested want to go to maybe not necessarily to the government, but just to policy adjacent fields. And there are several problems. I mean, the pay is just one problem. The second I would go to technical industry, I would probably 10x my salary. I mean, that's I think academia is very fun, and I like my life. I mean, obviously, most people would probably just do that instantly, which makes sense. So that's something that probably needs to be addressed. Also, I mean, just most people who are very sort of technically interested, they like the sort of build quick, break quick mentality of, especially California and the Silicon Valley base, which is very different, and from how the government works. You can't just change it in a way, but I think that again there are a lot of these think tanks or government agencies focused on cyber that works pretty quickly. I think that's super important, and really ensuring that happens. There are also some cool collaborations, both in the US and in the UK. We see where the government invites a few industry professionals to get security clearance, so they can keep their industry work, but they're allowed to come with recommendations to important, cybersecurity policy decisions. They're, enabled to join discussions that are classified because they have the security clearance. And I think that's really good to sort of, you don't have to leave your industry job, but you can get security clearance, you can contribute to these discussions. Because that just fosters discussions, right? Then the people meet, the people get to know each other, and that's always the first step. And I think these things are very useful. I'm digressing a bit for how to make policy people more tech interested, but I think that somehow getting computer science people to institutes like the Harvard Kennedy School, that's very important.
Yeah, it's a difficult problem to solve, especially if your interest isn't there. Like if you're not interested in going that direction, it's easier to push back. And I think it's the unknown too, right? If you're not involved with it, you're sort of in the dark in terms of what that involves. Yeah. But I do agree with you, having different perspectives in the same room is going to be beneficial, because then you're going to be bringing those new perspectives, those new thoughts. And I think that's how you would evolve that program.
Yeah, and I think that's one good thing, and this really is a big problem, because I think no one in any sort of policy sector that I met would say that we have an adequate level of deeply technical people working with us. So to some degree, we would need to make this work. Maybe having even more computer science related education programs in policy oriented schools, that would be good. Having sort of upskilling programs where people can take a few months off to study, maybe something like this.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of future challenges, in your research, you had mentioned the need for better accountability mechanisms and risk quantification across the board, which again, I think is an incredibly critical component. If you were hypothetically advising a foreign national government today, how would you suggest they begin quantifying risk in a way that's valuable both politically and operationally? What sort of variables would play into your strategic roadmap?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I think that the quantification, I'm very passionate about that. That was a big change for me when I moved away a bit from my technical education. And actually, to quickly go back to your previous question, I think we should also tell technical people about how important it is for them to learn things outside of tech. Because, for example, when I started doing this project, I met with a lot of policy people, a lot of business-oriented C-suite people, and I talked a lot about the technical solutions I created in my research, and all of them, especially business people, said that well, this solution is really cool and really good, but how does it translate into growth and profitability for my business? And that was sort of mind-boggling for me, because I had the impression, hey, this solution will 100% make your business more secure, so why wouldn't you implement it? And then people didn't really care, right? Because it wasn't obvious to them that they would be more profitable, even though they were more secure, because there's so many other things. they can do to generate revenue. And just look up a little bit. And I think the broader cybersecurity community still don't think too much about this and saying that, hey, we have a good cybersecurity solution, but how exactly does this solution translate into, US dollar value for the organization or into other impact metrics for the policymakers and so forth? And being really good at quantifying this, I think that's the key to everything, honestly, because if you could say very clearly to organizations or to government policymakers, this cybersecurity implementation will save this amount of money, or it will save this amount of emotional stress, whatever it does, people would implement it. But it is not clear because there's such a big uncertainty about what does it mean to be hacked, what is the actual cost. There's a bunch of externalities, which is a fancy word for these secondary costs. For example, you lose reputations, or you're a big company and you get hacked, and a lot of your customers will now be exposed, and their emails and their personal information will be available to sell in the darknet. There's a bunch of cool studies that show how much is an email address worth on the darknet and so forth. And it's kind of uncertain. We have seen some class action lawsuits, which is one way to determine that that will be the cost for these companies. But yeah, I think we really need to do that much better. And for a government, it's the same, right? I would look even more into cyber insurance companies, because there's a lot of really smart people working there. They obviously try to quantify this, is that's what their entire business is made upon. As a nation, I would probably try to collaborate, try to enforce and empower cyber insurers even more, because they will probably be the backbone of this, because they really, there's sometimes the general insurance market has a bad reputation for other reasons, but I think that they're the ones who are very directly incentivized of figuring out what things cost. They have a bit of a skewed perspective because obviously they want to sell their service, but I still think that we need to do that better, because it's all going to be a game of resources in the end. That's what it always is. And the resources will always be too few. I mean, that's the life of every cybersecurity professional ever. So if you work at a cybersecurity agency for a government, you will be forced to take decisions with very limited resources. And in order to do that, you need to be able to quantify. You need to have really good frameworks to say, hey, what does this mean in terms of national security? How can a lot of people these days talk about cybersecurity as a business enabler, not just a cost? Can we do things like this? But yeah, I really look down at, and this is quite context dependent for the country. Some countries have very specific attackers that always pokes them. Some countries have more of a threat from everyone. Some countries have a lot of internal insider threats and so forth. So you have to look into who are your main attackers, then really try to quantify it. And when you have a quantified picture, then try to direct different budgets and see, well, do we need to spend way more money educating a general technical workforce? Or do we need to upskill specific pen testers and so forth? So yeah, assess the situations and quantify more, and then see wherever your gaps are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't know how close you can get with the quantification, because like you said, it's when you add in factors like reputation or residual loss, it's really hard to pinpoint that, but I really think you can get close. I think you can really get close. So your work, or this particular work, spans across, I believe it was 7 major countries, each having their own different political standpoints. Were there any particular strategies or innovations from one particular country that you think deserves more global recognition or focus that would benefit the other countries? Meaning that, is there something that other nations are overlooking that you found they should be more, adapting to within their own context?
So there's a lot of things like this. And one thing that I like to talk about is, first of all, I'll mention Japan, because Japan has a really good cybersecurity for all initiative, which is they try to address vulnerable population groups. And this is kind of coherent, again, to Japan's sort of philosophy, what I think about it. I've never been to Japan, but it seems like a society that really prioritizes and respects their elders, for example. They try to include everyone. And this is, you really see this in their cybersecurity strategy. I believe that in the US, in European countries we analyzed and so forth, we really need more of this, because much of my other research is, for example, looking into scams towards the elderly. There's a bunch of these scams these days. It's very poor protection against the elderly. I think perhaps this is due to national cybersecurity still being relatively nascent, and first countries work on securing the critical infrastructure and making sure that we secure against AI threats. And when all of this is in place, then they will look into securing vulnerable population groups. But there's so much research, part of my own research too, saying that we can't just have a one-size-fits-all approach. And almost all the strategies, except for Japan's, have a one-size-fits-all approach in terms of population protection. I think that's very naive. I think we really need to change that, because I get contacted almost on a weekly, sometimes a daily basis, with someone saying, "Hey, like my grandfather was hacked. Can you help him?" And my grandmother lost her life savings. Can you help her? And very rarely I can, right? Because these things often have to be proactive. And most countries have some amount of cyber awareness framework. CISA has in the US, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, have a pretty good guide for how to develop good cyber awareness. But I don't think it's that intuitive to old people, especially people who don't really use the internet that much. Perhaps they're mostly targeted to cell phone scams when someone calls them, and now you have these AI bots that can just call them automatically. As you also have to tailor these things and see, if it's a younger population group, maybe they're not using email so much, but they use other social media channels, etc. So you really have to be a little bit more specific. Also, just tailor this education to different cultural contexts. And I think all the countries really need to do this more.
Yeah. Is there a way to quantify the receptiveness of these strategies? So take Japan, for instance, as being, I guess, more cutting edge or more ahead of others. Is there a way to sort of put metrics behind the results of what they're doing to say, look, this is proven. This is how we should take this from them and apply it other places?
So yeah, I think this is the magic bullet. This is sort of what everything is, because exactly right. If I take the opposite of what you say, what other people could tell me when I say this now is that, okay, so Japan is doing this well, so what? What does it mean? What does it matter?
Yeah.
And that's something we really need to answer. And that's actually the second project that we're working on right now. The follow-up study is exactly this. We're trying to create the better ways to measure the impact and the success of national cybersecurity strategy. It's tricky. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be impactful work, but it's, our best hope is to be better than we are now, because we are not going to be perfect, not by a long shot. But I think that, yes, there are ways to do it. Those ways are not really explored or done today. There are there's some frameworks for this, and there are, again, the US has a good implementation plan and so forth. But to really measure that impact, because that's a dream, right? To have a completely data-driven cybersecurity strategy where you can see that if you don't protect the elderly, it's going to cost you this much money, and it's going to cost you this much emotional strain or stress or whatever. And I think that's something we really need to do. We're not there yet. That's the honest answer. But it's a great question, because this exactly after this report was published, we kind of realized that this is what we need to work on right now, and we're going to try to create better metrics for that.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that, because you hear the impact on a very small scale now, maybe one-offs, but not a way to confidently say that this change is going to make this impact, because I think that's how you get the buy-in from the other nations, and that's how you build that acceptance rate and just move forward on a mass scale. So yeah, definitely let me know how that project goes. I'll be interested in seeing the results there.
Yeah, will do. And maybe one last point to that as well is that some of these topics, again, they are really complex in terms of how sort of to quantify the cost. Because another thing, a lot of these scams towards the elderly are done by, for example, North Korean phishing labs or social engineering labs. And it's estimated, a lot of this money that they steal from the elders, and it's not negligible sums of money. It's quite large. They go straight to funnel and to fund North Korean nuclear programs, for example, that we sanction here in the West. So these things are complicated, right? And I think there should be, I think it would make sense that every country has a responsibility to increase their cybersecurity and cyber awareness. Because again, if the US puts sanctions on North Korea and then they just fish all of our elders so that they still get the money anyway, then what is it's worth, right? And that's something that we also have to think about, that the money that they get, it's not just money. it's money that they use for sometimes very nefarious purposes.
Yeah, yeah, definitely have to factor that in, and that could skew your results too,
Yeah.
if you don't know that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right, well, man, I'm going to switch lanes for a moment. You travel a lot. I know you're back home now, but you do travel a lot. You work hard. You put a lot into this research, and I don't know how much downtime you get. We've hung out before in Vegas at Hacker Summer Camp, but what do you do in your downtime? Like, do you venture out? Do you like enjoy your nightlife there? You're in a very, very cool area where there's a lot of nightlife. Just curious, where do you hang out? And what's the coolest place that you ever hang out? Was it a bar? Was it a restaurant, lounge, something like that? And then, what makes it unique? And we don't need to keep this geographically limited to where you are now, but maybe, throughout your travels, do you have a memorable experience of a bar or bar type venue that you've ever been to?
So that's a brilliant question. I love to sort of, I love to zoom out a little bit. That's why we always have fun, because we can talk about the professional stuff. We can also just have a blast. And these past years, I actually didn't have too much downtown time. But what I love to do also, I'm born in Sweden and now I live in Boston, which is pretty rough winter. So my dream is to always travel somewhere warm in the winters. I love surfing. I'm a big sort of surfing guy. Not just the act of surfing, but also the lifestyle, the culture. So I would definitely say that having any type of surfer bar where it's just it's a nice little vibe, some reggae playing in the background. You have the sunset, you have some good smoothies and all these kind of thing. That's that's my vibe. I've been to me and a couple of friends. We used to travel every winter to these types of places, and hopefully this winter maybe I get the time to go again. And been to Costa Rica, to the west coast of Costa Rica is wonderful. Some of the best sunsets I've ever seen. Really beautiful. Yeah, all a bunch of different sort of jungle bars there. It's you have people surfing in the sunset. You take a good little fruit smoothie or drink there, and you just enjoy life. I think that's about as good as it gets, actually.
Love that, man. Yeah, you're not getting too much surfing in Boston.
No, we have the white sharks now too. There's a lot of white sharks here. So if you surf, you may just get eaten.
Oh yeah, you don't want it. Yeah, you don't want it.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, I just heard last call here. You have time for one more?
Yeah.
All right. If you decided to open a cybersecurity themed bar, what would the name be and what would your signature drink be called?
Wow, that's good. So first of all, me and some friends were actually discussing buying a plot of land in Costa Rica or Mexico. We haven't done it yet, but if I ever... Maybe I will need to leave academia to do that. But if I ever do that, that will be like the destination of the cybersecurity bar, because I do not think there are probably not many surf/cybersecurity bars in the tropical region.
No.
The place.
I've never been to one.
Yeah. Have you been to one?
I said I haven't been to one yet.
No, I don't think many people have, but I'll invite you. You'll be the guest of honor whenever I do.
I'm there.
The name, oh man, the name is tough actually. It's, something with surfing. Maybe I can take your input on this. Something with surfing and hacking and sunsets. What
be like late night web surfing.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's web surfing. Yeah, something with this.
Yeah, web surfing. You could
web
definitely
surfing is good actually. And imagine this would be a great place. Then you have the hackers in like the Sunset Lounge, web surfing, and the signature drink in web surfing. It's maybe a hackerita, like a margarita.
Ooh, but it's a hackerita. I love that.
Oh man, this has to be a retirement dream now. Whenever.
Yeah. No, this is shaping up to be good.
Yeah.
I like it.
Whenever I open up the web surfer bar, you gotta be invited. We gotta have a bunch of hackeritas.
Yes, definitely let me know.
Cool.
Well, Fred, thanks so much for stopping by and joining me today, man. Again, it was great to catch up with you. And hopefully I'll see you in a few months in Vegas again.
Yeah, for sure. Have a great day, man. Thanks again for this chat and for your great work.
Thank you, man. Take care.
Take care.